35 years ago, 40 years ago, that I kept with me, didn't throw away.
Sally Field isn't just a name in Hollywood history. She's a living testament to a time when acting wasn't about fame or flair. It was about feeling, about living through each role with raw truth. From the quiet defiance she embodied as Norma Ray to the warmth and wisdom she breathed into Forrest Gump's beloved mother, Sally has always given the kind of performances that seem to come from a place deeper than the script. More than just a performer, she is a force of nature, a steadfast mother, a passionate advocate, a survivor of both personal hardship and the pressures of an industry that often tries to mold women into shadows of themselves. Sally Field's presence has endured for over 6 decades, and every chapter of her life carries the kind of emotional gravity that can't be manufactured. Her voice once soared across Broadway theaters. Her smile lit up red carpets. But behind the radiance is a woman who has been shaped not by ease, but by endurance. A woman who took suffering and molded it into unforgettable art. A soul forged in the fires of childhood wounds, career struggles, and heartbreaks so private that they remained hidden behind decades of graceful appearances. And now, at 78, as the storm of life begins to calm, or so we hope, the deepest and perhaps most painful chapters of her journey reveal themselves. It's easy to admire the icon. This is who I am. Before the spotlight ever found her, before the awards and applause, her story began in a place that taught her silence. Not peace, but silence. The kind that muffles cries. The kind that cloaks pain. Sally was born on November 6, 1946, in Pasadena, California. Her mother, Margaret Field, was a luminous actress under contract with Paramount Pictures. Her father, Richard Dryden Field, was a decorated veteran of World War II. At first glance, it might have seemed she was born into privilege, into opportunity. But the reality was far more complex. By the time Sally was 4 years old, her parents' marriage crumbled. The divorce didn't just dissolve their home. It shattered her sense of safety. What followed was not a nurturing rebuild, but a slow, quiet descent into emotional isolation. Soon after the divorce, her mother married again, this time to a man who appeared charismatic to the world, yet concealed a far more devastating reality within their home. Jock Mahoney, a Hollywood stuntman, carried the air of charm in public, but behind closed doors, that charm gave way to control and violation. At the age of 13, Sally endured the unimaginable. Her stepfather crossed painful boundaries, emotional and physical. In her deeply personal 2018 memoir, these weren't miscommunications. They weren't misunderstandings. They were violations of trust, of body, of innocence. And more than the betrayal itself, what cut deeper was the inaction of her mother, the one person who should have protected her. Sally wasn't just hurt, she was invisible. She later described her younger self as a child screaming internally, her pain muffled in a house where no one listened. That sentence alone carries a weight that words can barely hold. In this bleak emotional landscape, she found an unlikely escape: acting. Not as a career dream, but as a lifeline, a way to step outside herself and into the skin of someone else. Someone who wasn't afraid. She watched her mother on film sets, fascinated by the way characters were allowed to speak the truths she herself was forbidden to express. In school, she clung to drama class like it was oxygen. She once reflected, "Acting let me be someone who didn't feel afraid." These weren't auditions. They were therapy sessions with an audience. Every monologue was a scream into the void. Every scene was a fragment of her truth disguised as fiction. At a high school party in the early 1960s, a talent scout took notice of her. What seemed like a coincidence became her first whisper of hope. She was invited to audition at Columbia Studios. For someone whose voice had been ignored for so long, this invitation didn't just promise opportunity. It offered recognition. But fate wasn't done testing her yet. At 17, still a teenager, Sally faced another life-altering experience. An unplanned pregnancy followed a brief and confusing encounter at a graduation party. It wasn't love. It wasn't even intimacy. It was another moment in a pattern of silence, pressure, and helplessness. Instead of being met with support, she was met with cold control. Her stepfather once again took charge, this time orchestrating a trip to a clinic across the border in Tijuana, Mexico. No explanation, no discussion, just a plane ticket and a broken girl, alone in a foreign room, undergoing a procedure that would add yet another invisible scar to her soul. She woke up numb, disoriented, and abandoned. Her mother didn't come. No one held her hand. It wasn't just a painful medical experience. It was a message that she didn't matter, that her feelings were secondary. Sally made a choice that most in Hollywood would never dare to make. She walked away. From 1968 to 1971, she disappeared from the screen, turned down every sitcom role, every lighthearted character. Sally gave everything she had. She poured the full weight of her life into the role. The childhood confusion, the buried anguish, the need to finally be heard. And when the series aired, it didn't just shock the public, it stunned the critics. She wasn't the flying nun anymore. She was a revelation. For that performance, she won her first Emmy Award. But more importantly, she earned something far rarer in Hollywood: respect. Respect as an actress, as a woman who had refused to let the industry define her, as someone who had stepped away from applause in order to rediscover her voice and come back stronger than anyone expected. But even then, the road ahead was far from smooth. Between 1973 and 1976, she had lived in a kind of professional and personal limbo, turning down roles, battling depression, sinking into episodes of disordered eating. She felt like a ghost moving through her own life, that she had nearly accepted a life of obscurity rather than keep pretending to be the girl Hollywood wanted. And yet, after Sybil, something shifted. The world began to see her not just as sweet or pretty or fun, but as serious, complex, powerful. And then came Norma Ray in 1979. It was the kind of role most actresses dream of: gritty, political, urgent. Sally played a Southern mill worker who leads a union fight against exploitative labor conditions. The performance was electric. On screen, she was fierce, vulnerable, courageous. Every moment in the film pulsed with a kind of energy that couldn't be faked. Because it wasn't faked. Sally wasn't acting. She was channeling a lifetime of being silenced, underestimated, and told she wasn't enough. And when she won the Oscar for Best Actress that year, it wasn't just a career milestone. It was a personal revolution. For the first time, the industry stood up and acknowledged the power she had always carried. Yet even in that moment of victory, Sally didn't forget the journey it took to get there. Another victory not just for Sally the actress, but for Sally the woman who had once been told she was only good for smiling and looking sweet. And it was on that Oscar stage, glowing in a gown, eyes bright with disbelief, that she delivered one of the most quoted acceptance speeches of all time: "You like me. Right now, you like me." It wasn't vanity. It was relief. It was a cry from someone who had spent years being dismissed, ignored, or boxed in, finally feeling seen not for a facade, but for her soul. But as her career soared, Sally continued to face an all-too-familiar challenge in Hollywood: aging. In an industry obsessed with youth and appearances, especially for women, each year past 35 was viewed as a step closer to irrelevance. But Sally never subscribed to that thinking. She didn't chase roles to preserve her fame. She chased truth. Characters who carried real emotions, real struggles. The kind of women she saw in a mirror every morning. Her performances in Steel Magnolias, 1989, Mrs. Doubtfire, 1993, and Forrest Gump, 1994, proved that she wasn't going anywhere. In Steel Magnolias, she broke hearts as a mother grieving the loss of her daughter. The famous cemetery scene, where her rage and pain burst out in trembling sobs, left audiences shattered, because it didn't feel like acting. It felt like the release of every emotion she had held back in her own life. In Mrs. Doubtfire, she played the ex-wife, not as a villain, but as a fully realized woman torn between love and logic, trying to protect her children while navigating heartbreak. It was subtle, layered and real. And in Forrest Gump, as the mother who teaches her son the meaning of life in simple, profound truths, she anchored one of cinema's most beloved characters with quiet strength. Still, even with 2 Oscars, decades of acclaim, and box office success, Sally never stopped fighting to be seen for the depth she carried. Hollywood didn't make it easy. Roles became scarcer, more superficial. Scripts ignored the complexities of older women. But Sally wasn't interested in pretending to be young or playing caricatures of aging. She leaned into the truth. In 2012, at the age of 66, she delivered one of the most hauntingly honest performances of her career as Mary Todd Lincoln in Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. To prepare, she gained weight, dug into historical texts, and immersed herself in the psyche of a woman long misunderstood. What emerged on screen wasn't just a period character. It was a portrait of grief, power, and madness that felt achingly human. To high school sweetheart Stephen Craig in 1968 began with hope. She was 22, yearning for a sense of stability after the chaos of her childhood. With Stephen, she envisioned a home filled with peace and purpose. Together, they had 2 sons, Peter in 1969 and Eli in 1972. Sally adored motherhood. It grounded her. Her children became her reason, her refuge. But even the most joyful seasons can carry undercurrents of loneliness. As Sally's career demanded more of her time and energy, and as Stephen pursued his own ambitions, the space between them grew wider. Their relationship unraveled not with fireworks, but with silence. A slow, aching drift apart. By 1973, the marriage had effectively ended, finalized in 1975. That her loyalty could reach him. But love alone is not always enough. When she was offered Norma Ray, Burt dismissed the role, told her she wasn't good enough. Even as she later stood holding an Oscar for that performance, he refused to attend the ceremony. That absence stung more than any critique, because it wasn't just about the award. It was about the emotional support she so desperately needed and never received. Their relationship lasted several years. Years of laughter, arguments, intimacy, and pain. In her memoir, In Pieces, Sally described it plainly. He made me feel small. And still, she stayed, hoping things would change. Hoping love would finally be safe. But in 1982, she made the hardest decision. She left. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she had finally begun to love herself more. After their breakup, they didn't speak for decades. It wasn't until the end of Bert's life that he reached out with the words Sally had longed to hear. "You were the love of my life." But by then, the weight of their unspoken years had left her heart too heavy to respond the way she once might have. She wrote, "By the time he offered his love freely, I'd already set it down." It was a lesson she carried deeply. That timing can be the most devastating part of love. That sometimes walking away is the bravest thing a person can do. In 1984, amid the echoes of past heartbreaks and the applause of career triumphs, Sally Field made a decision that once again reflected her eternal hope. That love, in the right form, could still offer sanctuary. She married producer Alan Greisman, and more loving than I ever thought I could be. But while her relationship with her children grew ever richer, her marriage to Alan quietly began to unravel. There was no dramatic rupture, no betrayal or scandal, just a slow drift into emotional distance. Over time, the once stable waters grew still, then cold. By 1994, Sally recognized what she had once been too afraid to admit in her youth. That love, even in its calmest form, must also nourish the soul. And when it no longer did, she knew it was time to walk away, not in bitterness, but in preservation. "I've never been good at choosing a spouse," she joked years later in an interview. The laughter behind her words was warm but wistful, as if acknowledging the ache behind each of those attempts to find something she had never been given freely in her earliest years: safe love. Yet through it all, Sally never gave up on love itself. She simply stopped letting it cost her peace. In the years that followed, Sally Field did what few in Hollywood managed to do. She aged gracefully, honestly, and with profound intention. She didn't chase youth. She embraced change. She didn't compete for attention. She made space for legacy. Her life began to slow, not in spirit, but in rhythm, and she chose to fill that space with meaning. She spent more time with her sons and grandchildren. Her home in Pacific Palisades became her sanctuary, 2,800 square feet of peace nestled high above the ocean, where every window opened to the kind of beauty that felt earned. It was not a mansion built for status, but a home filled with memory. Photos of her children and grandchildren. Shelves of books, many of them underlined with thoughts she scribbled in quiet hours. And yet, just when Sally believed the hardest storms had passed, the universe tested her one more time. On October 29, 1988, in what was meant to be an ordinary journey, she boarded a private jet owned by television legend Merv Griffin. Alongside her were 3 of her family members, heading out of Aspen, Colorado. The air was crisp, the sky clear. The scream that tore from her throat before she even realized it was her own, the desperate search through smoke for the voices of her family. Miraculously, all 4 of them survived with only minor physical injuries. But the emotional aftermath was anything but minor. The crash haunted her. In the weeks that followed, she experienced flashbacks, snippets of fear stitched together in a reel she couldn't turn off. The precise moment the plane tilted. The way her hands shook so badly she couldn't unfasten her seatbelt. The realization that she had almost died with so much left unsaid, unlived. Publicly, she minimized it. She didn't want the accident to define her. But privately, it changed her. "I thought, this is it. This is how my story ends," she later said. But it didn't end. And that truth transformed her. Surviving what felt like certain death didn't just remind her of life's fragility. It taught her to stop waiting for validation, for love, for happiness. It taught her to lean harder into the things that made life beautiful. Long mornings in the garden with dirt under her nails and the sun on her skin. Quiet breakfasts with her sons. Evenings spent watching classic films, not for critique, but for comfort. And perhaps most importantly, she stopped seeking approval. From men, from studios, from an industry that had never truly known what to do with a woman like her. She had always been too real. Her home is modest by celebrity standards, 2,800 square feet, nestle high above the Pacific coastline. But for Sally, it is a temple of memory, not a monument to wealth. Inside, the space breathes with stories. Photographs of her children and grandchildren line the walls. Books are scattered across end tables and shelves, many annotated with thoughts, reflections, and passages she's turned to during moments of personal reckoning. This house is not decorated to impress. It is lived in, loved in. Every corner tells the truth. Despite an estimated net worth of $50 million, Sally lives simply. Her car is a hybrid Lexus RX 450h, not for show, but for reliability, for sustainability, for quiet values lived rather than spoken. She follows a mostly plant-based diet, not for trend, but for wellness. Her yoga mat is worn, but beloved, the creaks in her joints met with deep breaths rather than complaints. Aging gracefully, she's often said, isn't about resisting change. It's about walking with it. She no longer views her reflection with critique, but with compassion. There was a time when mirrors reflected back only the harsh expectations of an industry that demanded youth, perfection, and submission. Now, those same mirrors reflect freedom. "I've made peace with my past," she shared in a recent interview. "Now I just love my grandkids." That love defines her days. 5 grandchildren now fill her world with laughter, mess, and meaning. Sally is no longer center stage, and she doesn't want to be. She is the matriarch now, the one who tells bedtime stories, who bakes cookies, who kneels in the soil beside little hands planting spring flowers. The kind of love she longed for as a child, she now pours freely into this new generation. And through it all, her 3 sons remain the pillars of her life. Peter, Eli, and Sam. each a testament to the way she parented with presence, protection, and passion. Her relationship with Sam, her youngest, has blossomed into something particularly special. When Sam came out, Sally didn't just support him, she stood beside him. She became a vocal advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, not as a celebrity, but as a mother. In 2012, she accepted the Human Rights Campaign's Ally for Equality Award. Her voice, calm but unwavering, spoke of unconditional love, of the courage it takes to live authentically in a world still learning how to accept difference. She has also continued her advocacy for women's rights, aligning with organizations like Vital Voices Global Partnership to uplift female leaders across the globe. And even in her 70s, in 2005, Sally was diagnosed with osteoporosis, a condition that weakens the bones, often invisibly, until it causes life-altering damage. For someone so physically active, the news was a shock. She has spoken of the stiffness in her joints, the days when her body feels less like an ally and more like a weight to carry. But never with bitterness, always with grace. To me, she said, wellness isn't perfection. It's showing up. It's staying present. Her relationship with her body, once filtered through Hollywood's merciless lens, is now one of acceptance. Each wrinkle is a story. Each ache a reminder of a life lived fully. Her public appearances have grown rare, but when she does speak, it is never empty. Whether it's about reproductive rights, climate justice, or bone health, she brings with her a voice refined not by fame, but by experience. And in 2018, she gave the world perhaps her most raw gift, her memoir, In Pieces. The title itself was an offering, a nod to the fractured, hidden parts of her life that she had long kept from the spotlight. In its pages, she revisited the abuse, the abandonment, the shame. She named names. She confronted ghosts. And above all, she told the truth. Not just for her, but for the little girl she used to be. She wrote the book as a tribute to the child who had once screamed in silence. I wanted to give her what no one gave her back then, she said. A voice, a witness. In Pieces was not a celebrity memoir designed to polish image or boost sales. It was a reckoning, a confession, a healing. And for many readers, especially women who had lived with their own shadows, it was a balm. As she entered her twilight years, Sally began to live with a softness that had nothing to do with fragility. A woman who has lived not in spite of her pain, but through it, who has turned each heartbreak into clarity, each failure into foundation, and each silence into a voice that now echoes far beyond the boundaries of Hollywood. Those who know her best describe Sally as the same person behind closed doors as she is in interviews. Open, searching, self-aware. Her conversations don't orbit around celebrity gossip or industry nostalgia. They center on family, on activism, on books, on healing. She talks about her grandchildren with a reverence others reserve for royalty, about how their laughter is a kind of medicine, about how she can't believe the world has given her such light after so many years of learning to see in the dark. In her garden, she plants not just vegetables or flowers, but hope, legacy, continuity. She teaches her grandkids to love the earth, to listen to stories, to ask hard questions, and to always speak their truth. When she looks back on her life, about how every part she'd ever played, from the lightest sitcom to the darkest drama, had taught her something. About herself, about the world, about empathy. She reminded the audience that even when you feel invisible, even when you think no one is watching, you still matter. Your story still matters. Your voice still counts. In a business often obsessed with reinvention, Sally's gift has always been revelation. Not changing who she is, but uncovering more of it, layer by layer, year by year. She didn't survive the industry. She reshaped it on her own terms. There's a particular moment in her memoir that stands out. It's not dramatic or cinematic. It's quiet. She describes sitting alone at her kitchen table in the early morning, sipping coffee, watching the light filter through the trees. The house is still. The world is still. For the little girl who once felt invisible in a silent house in Pasadena. For the woman who stood on Oscar stages with tears in her eyes and strength in her voice. For the grandmother who now wisps. RS bedtime stories that carried both fiction and fact, softness and steel. Sally Field is more than a legend. She is a light, and it burns still.